And so, first of all, thank you very much for joining. Today, for us, it's in Queensland, in Australia, it's the 15th. So it's a day that is called in a Tibetan Buddhist calendar, Labab Duchen. I think that for you guys, it will be tomorrow. And so that's one of the holidays, the biggest holidays in the Buddhist calendar. We have 4 of them. So we have, amongst them, we have the birth, enlightenment, and parinirvana of the Buddha. We have the day in which the Buddha turned the wheel of Dhamma. We have the day in which the Buddha performed miracles. And this day, today for us, is Labab Duchen, the day in which, according to the, I think, traditional story, the Buddha descended from a god realm that is called the gods of the 33. And so it's quite interesting. We follow in our tradition, we follow the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the Mahayana tradition. So we have our own views about what the Buddha is capable of doing. Like, for example, the Buddha is capable of displaying different bodies in different realms. The Buddha is always present. The Buddha's mind embraces all phenomena wherever phenomena are. But according to the traditional story, I think that it was probably 6 years after the Buddha attained the state of enlightenment. He already gathered around him disciples. He had a king patron, Bimbisara, that was one of his greatest supporters. He had quite a few students. And then due to his clairvoyance, he saw that his mother, that passed away about a week after the Buddha was born, he saw that she took birth in the god realm of the 33. And then he traveled through his miraculous powers to this god realm, taught the Dhamma to his mother, but also to all the gods that were in this realm of existence. And it was said that because he traveled there, he wasn't present here in this human realm, on this ground. And so the king and the disciples were missing the Buddha, was wondering what's going on. And Mudgalyayana, that was one of the foremost disciples of the Buddha, saw that the Buddha was in that godly realm, and he was exalted, or he was asked by the king to ask the Buddha to return to this human realm to teach us the Dhamma. And so the Buddha did that. So that's the day in which the Buddha came down from the godly realm. I mean, I kind of find this, I like those stories, those epics from the Buddha's time. Sometimes kind of my heretic mind is asking questions, what about this and what about that? But, I'm trying to find loopholes in the story of the Buddha. Like, for example, now the Buddha is omnipresent in all realms. Really, we have to ask the Buddha to come back to our realm to teach the Dhamma. Anyway, regardless of whether we can find faults in the story or not, it's actually quite nice to belong to this all-embracing Buddhist tradition that spread all over Southeast Asia. And if we have an opportunity to create virtue, why not, regardless of what the details of the story are? Just a second, I'm just going to say hi to Kathy. Hi, Kathy. So that's the...
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's talk later on.
Yeah, we'll talk later on. So Kathy Victor just stepped into our room. And, in a couple of years, we're going to celebrate 50 years to Chenrezig Institute. And Kathy Victor was one of the four forefathers of Chenrezig Institute. 4 fathers and 4 mothers.
2 times.
Yeah. 2 forefathers, 2 foremothers. Anyway, hi, Kathy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And so, anyway, it's a great opportunity for creating virtue. So anyway, at any given day, we want to create virtue. And to create virtue begins with turning our mind to be a positive state of mind, having the right intention. And when we think of all the teachings that the Buddha gave, they all come down to 2 aspects: the aspect of practice, and the practice is non-violence, non-harmfulness, but it's not simply not to harm others. I mean, when I sleep, apart from turning, right and left sometimes and hopefully not crushing insects or whatever, it's not that I kind of harm other living beings while I'm asleep. To not harm other sentient beings is mainly to develop an attitude of care for others, in which we deliberately try to abstain from harming others. So that's the aspect of non-harmfulness of the teachings of the Buddha. And with non-harmfulness, we practice generosity and ethics of abstaining harm, and the basis of that harm, we practice joyous effort and patience and all other practices that come under the big umbrella of the Bodhisattva practice, all of them are motivated by an attitude of affectionate love to others and abstaining from harming them. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the aspect of this philosophical view of dependent origination, dependent arising. And so, although there are many different levels to dependent origination, dependent arising, the very summation of it is that whatever exists doesn't exist in a way that it appears to us, to our senses. So that currently, whatever we see, whatever we hear, whatever we feel, whatever we taste, whatever we smell, whatever we think of, appears to our senses and to our mental consciousness as if it exists by itself in a self-sustaining way. And so we describe it in different ways. We say it exists independently, objectively, inherently, truly. All of these words are synonyms to describe a certain fictitious reality of things existing in and of themselves without being related to the observer, which is we ourselves. And so when we develop the view of dependent origination, we come to see how nothing exists by itself from its own side, objectively, but it exists subjectively from the point of view of the observer. And we prove that using the philosophical view of dependent origination, dependent arising. And so all the teachings that Buddha gave to us come down on those two aspects, the aspect of non-harmfulness and the aspect of understanding how things exist, that they exist interdependently. And so when we think of what would it mean to develop virtue in our mind, it will be to not only develop an attitude of non-harmfulness, but to, as much as we can, base it on the philosophical view of dependent origination, wishing to understand how reality exists, to exist how we depend upon others, and therefore in no way it is right for us to take actions that come at the expense of others. So of course we want to be of benefit to others as much as we can, in taking into consideration that living beings have been our parents and they've been kind to us in previous lifetimes and so on and so forth, but also understanding how we are deeply connected with so many living beings in this life, and it is only because of them that we can get by in this life. And so we understand this intricate connection that we have with others, and through that we come to cherish them with an attitude of love. And so this was given to us, all those teachings were given to us by the Buddha. And so today when we start a session with correcting positive motivation, for us here it's Labab Duchen. It will be for you tomorrow, Labab Duchen, but it's okay, I think, to begin with correcting our motivation in terms of refuge and bodhicitta. So we rely upon the Buddha, we rely upon the Dhamma, we rely upon the Sangha, but particularly we rely, when we think of causal refuges and the resultant refuges, a causal refuge is the Buddha Shakyamuni, who developed the Dhamma in his own mind. He developed an insight into reality, a perceptual realization of reality, and through that, the Buddha stopped all afflictive states of mind, anger, attachment, ignorance, and so forth, but also all the potentials, all the seeds, all the imprints of these afflictive states of mind. And through that, he taught us the Dhamma. And so the Buddha is for us the refuge, or a refuge. The Dhamma is for us a refuge, and the community of Sangha, those that help us to implement those teachings, are also for us refuge. But really, when we think about it in terms of what will give us protection from suffering and the cause of suffering, that would be the Dhamma that we will develop in our own mind stream. And so developing an understanding of reality, putting a stop to ignorance, anger, and attachment through developing a perceptual realization of reality. But even before that, every single positive thing that we do, any virtuous action that we do, is protecting us from suffering. When we think about it, particularly in karma, and this is what we are exploring here in this module, karma, every positive action that we do will result in happiness or well-being. If it results in happiness and well-being, it will protect us in that very experience from suffering. And so that for us is a real refuge. So our own virtues, our own karma, our own positive karma, for me, My own karma is my protector, my refuge. And in the future, all the true paths and all the true cessations that I will develop in my mind, that will be my real refuge. Myself becoming a Sangha, an Arya Sangha, someone that realizes emptiness or reality perceptually. My own becoming of Buddha, that will be my final refuge. And we want to become Buddhas for the sake of, as we often say, for the sake of all living beings, in taking into considering all the benefit that we got from them since time without beginning up until now, or at least when we consider all the benefit that we get from other living beings in this life, we want to repay that kindness. And so we think, first of all, about the causes for refuge. Fear and faith. These are the two foremost causes for going for refuge. And so often we don't like to go to do, to practice the Dharma motivated by fear. Now we want to practice the Dharma with an informed attitude. We want to make our own decisions and not follow someone that instills fear in us. But still, the first cause for going for refuge is fear. But rather than someone else instilling fear in us, we think that there is a chance that upon my death in my next lifetime, I'll be born in a miserable state of existence. This is not what I want, definitely. Hands down, I do not want to be born in a miserable state of existence in which not only there would be a lot of pain or suffering for me, or a great degree of discomfort, but also there would be a lot of confusion. I will not know what to do in order to protect myself from suffering. It is likely that my orientation would be only a short-term orientation oriented towards this life, not being able to consider future lifetimes. This is not what I want. And so we might call it fear, but basically it's thinking that this is not what I want. I want to be born in a better state of existence like I have now. Particularly when I think of, I spoke with one of my teachers yesterday, and today, since it's Slab Abduchen, I have a couple of my teachers sending me messages. I'm sending them messages. I want to meet them again in my future lifetime. If I could, I don't have any control over that. But when I think of what options do I have in the future, there could be either meeting my teachers again in the future, meeting the Dharma again in the future. That's option A. Option B is being born in a state in which I have no interest and no access, no availability of the Dharma at all. Out of those two options, hands down, I'm going for option number A. I don't want option number B. I want to meet my teachers again in the future. So, that's one type of fear, we can call it. But then we can extend it. I don't want to be again and again, do it again and again and again, and having to work hard again and again and again, and all along go through a process of birth and death and birth and death and birth and death and all undesirable experiences in between. And of course, we have also many good things that work for us in between, but also for us in our current state of existence, all the good that we experience doesn't stay for a very long time, doesn't last for a very long time. And so we want to emerge from that state of existence where we are being forced by our own karma, by our own afflictive states of mind, being forced again and again to be born in a cycle of birth and death. And to be liberated would mean that we free our mind from the chains of karma and afflictions. So it's not that we go to another place, to the city of liberation. It's rather that we make our mind become liberated. This is what liberation means. Our mind becomes liberated from ignorance, from anger and attachment, and not just a temporary liberation. It's a long-lasting, eternal liberation from ignorance, all other afflictive emotions and karma. And so, second type of fear is fear of remaining in a current state of existence. And the third kind of fear, which is the Mahayana type of fear, is fear that we will not have the ability to be of great benefit to others. Currently, we are limited, let alone not being able to be of benefit to everyone that has been kind to us, at least from a Buddhist perspective, since time without beginning and up until now. We find it difficult to benefit ourselves. Now, we like to benefit ourselves, we'd like to improve our situation, but we're still completely dumbfounded by ignorance, completely confused. And so the third type of fear is fearing that I'm not going to be able to be of great benefit to others. This is not what I want. I want to have all the means to quickly and more quickly be of benefit to others. And so we think then, we think of the three types of fear: fear of miserable states of existence, fear of samsaric suffering in general, and fear of not being able to be of benefit to others, which is called the fear of obscurations to knowledge, the fear of cognitive obscurations. So we fear all of this, and we think the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha can afford protection. So the causes, the Buddha Shakyamuni, the teacher, the Dhamma that the Buddha taught, and the Arya Sangha that teach us what we need to do are for us causal refuges. But my resultant refuge is my own Buddhahood. When I become a Buddha, I'll be fully protected from everything, from all this suffering, the sources of suffering. I'll have perfect ability to be of benefit to myself and others. And so to go for refuge is to develop this deep sense of reliance upon the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the cause, but also the resultant refuges, my own Buddhahood, my own Dhammahood, and my own Sanghahood. This is for me the real protection. This is what I rely upon. So everything that I do from this point onwards would then be in accord with the teachings that the Buddha gave, so that I can become Buddha, so that I can embody the Dhamma, so that I'll be able to become an Arya Sangha. And in short, whatever I do from this point onward would be to practice in a way that accords with karma. And so we think about it today for the beginning of a session as we correct the motivation. So I apologize for taking a long time to speak of the way that we correct the motivation. But with that in mind, I'll put the prayers in front of us on the screen, and we can think together of going for refuge. Right. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And so before we begin our discussion for today, I just want to turn your attention to the third line in this verse. And so this verse has the verse for going for refuge and developing bodhicitta is divided into two parts. The first two lines are associated with going for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And the last two lines are associated with bodhicitta practice and the practice of the six perfections. So this is refuge in bodhicitta. Now the third line, by the merits I create through listening to the teachings or listening to the Dhamma, is a verse that we use often in Dhamma sessions, Dhamma teachings. We want to turn our listening to the Dhamma, or teaching to the Dhamma, discussing the Dhamma to be a practice of refuge and a practice of bodhicitta, so that it become a Buddhist practice and also a Mahayana practice. But also, this verse originally was created by Atisha, the elder Atisha. He was the one who composed this verse, and he said, by the practices I do, such as generosity, may I become a Buddha to be of benefit to all living beings. His Holiness the Dalai Lama changed it a little bit, and he said we can think of by the two accumulations I create, the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom that I accumulate through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. All of them are valid versions of this verse. Are we happy to begin a discussion of karma? Any questions before we begin? All right. So, Michael, I think that at the end of our discussion last week, you asked a question about karma, whether karma is intention. And so I gave a kind of, I think, maybe a long-winded answer to that in relation to different components in the performance of an action or karma. But then I thought about it again, and I thought that in general, when you look at the role of intention in the formation of our actions, of our karma, the word for karma, as I said, is an action. And karma is motivated by a certain intention. And so our intentions are, you can say, our actions in and of themselves, not independently, but our intentions also are also types of karma. But then we act physically, we act verbally, we act mentally. And the things that we do with our body physically and the things that we do with our speech are actions. And of course, often they're motivated by certain intentions, but also you can call them actions as well. And it is also somewhat connected with the vows that we have. And so we might, as Buddhist practitioners, we might take different levels of vows. So the first level of vows are the vows of personal liberation. They're called in Sanskrit the pratimoksha vows, in which for you guys, for example, being lay practitioners, you might take upon yourself the refuge vow, or it is called the vow of approaching virtue. Or for me as a monastic, as a monk, I have the vow of a fully ordained monk, a gelong. So we have, in the whole level of pratimoksha, we have vows for lay practitioners, for ordained people. We have a one-day vow. But then we also have the bodhisattva vow, and we also have the tantric vow. Now, there are some Buddhist philosophies that say that the vows that we have mainly have to do with developing a form of abstention. So we avoid something, we abstain from certain things. And so when we look at, for example, the first level of vows, the pratimoksha vows, the vows of personal liberation, they mainly have to do with abstaining from certain physical actions or verbal actions. Now, we should not kill, steal, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and so forth, mainly have to do with physical and verbal actions. And so there are some Buddhist philosophies that say that since those actions, verbal or physical, take a certain physical expression, the vow that we have, which is a form of abstention, is also physical. It has a subtle physicality, subtle form, and this subtle physicality, subtle form is placed upon a mental continuum. Some philosophies say that. And so vows have form, and likewise, our physical and verbal actions have form. Some say that actually a vow is the intention to abstain from something. So it's a mind. A vow is a mind of abstention. It is a mind that relinquishes something. And so I'm giving you all that spiel, all that explanation, in order to go back to your question, Michael. You can say in some sense that karma is an intention, because most of our actions are involved with intention. But also, there are some Buddhist philosophies that say that it's not just the intention, it also has some form of physicality. Our physical and verbal actions, they're physical and verbal expressions of something. And so the mental factor intention, which is that which moves the mind towards an object, is karma. But not all karma is the mental factor intention, because they're also physical and verbal actions. So altogether, we have different ways of creating karma with our mental, movements, with turning our mind towards an object, with turning our mind in a virtuous way, in a non-virtuous way towards an object, but also the physical and verbal actions that we create. But also on top of that, one classification of karma that we will look at later on is into karma that was done, but not accumulated. And so karma done, but not accumulated refers to certain negative actions that we do, but a very powerful negative karma is not accumulated. Does it mean that we don't experience at all the result of karma that is not accumulated? I don't think that it means that. And so example for karma done but not accumulated is, for example, things that were done without intention. And so we walk along the path and unfortunately we squash ants. Or things that we do in our dreams, we don't intend to do them, we just dream of something. Things that were done and immediately regret them. And so they're called actions done but not accumulated. I think that they're called actions done but not accumulated from the point of view of, for example, killing an ant is considered to be in general a negative action, but I don't do it intentionally. And so I don't accumulate the full course of action that will produce a full course of suffering for me in the future, but the action is done and will have some repercussion in the future. What the repercussion will be, who can tell? I cannot tell. I'm not Buddha. But a full action was not accumulated. And so I didn't have the intention to do it, but there's still an action over there. There's still karma done, but not accumulated. Anyway, I've just kind of thought of mentioning that at the beginning of our meeting today, Michael, in order to add maybe a couple of other things to our discussion to think about. And with that, we can go back to where we left off in our previous session. And so let's look at that. I'll share it with you guys on the screen. All right, so we stopped in the previous session in the discussion of the general characteristics of karma, 4 general characteristics of karma. But before we continue with that today, let's just maybe briefly recap what we spoke of in the previous session. So we spoke of the whole topic of karma being presented to us by Lama Tsongkhapa and Atisha in the section pertaining to the cess of the path of those of the small scope. And so we then, when we practice the Lamrim, we first of all rely upon a spiritual teacher. We then think of wanting to make the most out of our life as a free and fortunate human being. We think of death and impermanence to begin with. Then we think of what will occur to us in my next lifetime, not wanting to be born in a miserable state of existence. Then thinking of going for refuge to Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and then the summation of the training that we take up in having gone for refuge is protecting our karma, acting in a way that accords with karma. So this is what we find karma in the presentation of the Lamrim. And then we spoke of karma being something that is hidden. It has levels which are slightly hidden and levels which are extremely hidden. And so there are some results of our actions that are obvious to us in this life. So you can say that that's a slightly hidden phenomenon, but also levels of karma which are extremely hidden. Being able to connect the dots between actions that we have done many lifetimes ago and experiencing the specific result in this lifetime is not something that only a Buddha knows. And we can surmise that the presentation of karma is correct through relying upon valid teachings, but also having analyzed the teachings and seeing that those teachings cannot be contradicted. And so we spoke about then the approach that we adopt to studying the topic of karma, since it does need a certain degree of faith. And so we need to study, first of all, the teachings of the Buddha in general and as extensively as we can to build our knowledge base, to think about the teachings that the Buddha gave, to look at levels which we can verify, levels of teachings that the Buddha gave that can be verified as correct. And the more we can verify them as being correct, not only depends upon logic, but also it depends upon our own personal experience, we can then come to the conclusion that some teachings that cannot be directly verified at the moment, in a sense that we cannot see them directly, we can still think that they're likely to be correct because other teachings that the Buddha gave were correct. So that's, I think, a useful approach to looking at karma. And so we spoke of karma being an action, physical, verbal, or mental actions, leaving an imprint or potential upon a mind stream. And when conditions are met, the potential ripens. And then we spoke of how we approach very extensively the topic of karma and recognizing a mind, and a mind is beginningless. And this is the continuity of the mind is the basis for thinking of the existence of past and future lifetimes. Now, karma is a part of causality. So causes and conditions come together, producing their own results. And there are obvious or manifest levels of causality that we can see in the world around us, but also hidden levels to them, like karma. Our actions produce results. So that's an internal level of causality. And as we said, we develop an understanding of karma and also faith in the working of karma through considering the validity of the teacher, the Buddha, how the Buddha was an authentic and valid teacher, and also how the teachings that the Buddha gave were valid. So that brings us to then think of karma. And so we started to look at the general characteristics of karma, and first of all, maintaining that karma is certain, and that positive actions lead to positive results. Virtuous actions lead to results of happiness and well-being. Negative actions, non-virtuous actions, lead to suffering or pain. Now, when I said that it leads to suffering and pain, we can try to include with our understanding what suffering is, because often when we use the word suffering, it sounds pretty heavy. Now, it feels like the deep level of physical pain, or it can be also slight physical pain, or mental anguish, slight or deep. But this is just one level of suffering. There are other levels of suffering. So we speak about, for example, suffering of change. That's definitely another level of suffering. But the most fundamental level of suffering is the body and mind that we have currently. The body that we have now, this one, is called pervasive suffering of conditionality. That's the third type of suffering that the Buddha spoke of. Pervasive suffering of conditionality. This is what I have now. In that I was born into this body 52 years ago. It means that from the very moment of being born into this body, it is guaranteed. There's no avoiding the suffering of birth, the suffering of aging, the suffering of sickness, and the suffering of death, the suffering of not getting what I want, the suffering of getting what I do not want, the suffering of looking for something and not being able to find it, and many other suffering that come together with having been born into a body such as this. And so, in other words, rather than calling this body suffering, we can say that it's not satisfactory, it's not good enough. This is not what I want, because if I have this body, it is guaranteed that I will experience many things that I do not seek. But not only that, because I have this body, and I also have this mind that is completely controlled by my own afflictive emotions, I'm reacting to my reality around me. Now I get angry, I get attached, I get jealous, I get proud, I get irritated, I hate, I like, and all those different afflictive states of mind that go out of control, and they condition my future suffering as well. So they condition my experiences in this life, but also because I have this body, it conditions me to negative experiences in future lifetimes. And so I'm connecting it with the general characteristics of karma. So karma is certain. Negative karma leads to suffering, not only to pain, but also it keeps us going in cyclic existence. In some sense, it is a fail-safe mechanism which ensures that again and again we are born in this state in which it's not good enough. It's not satisfactory enough, because it is guaranteed that things will not work out well for me. And so the current Geshe at the center, Geshe Tsultrim, said a few times before that when he was studying for a Geshe degree in his monastery, you have to go sometimes to a public debate. And there was, and in this public debate, kind of, if you have a stage fear, it's going to be pretty grim. But what happens is that often you find yourself sitting down as someone that needs to defend a certain position. And then you have a group of maybe 10 rowdy monks that are trying to attack your position, with kind of all the physical galore of kind of, with the hand clapping and stamping on the ground and yelling at you, trying to bring you to an internal contradiction, while hundreds of other monks are watching you. And so there was one great master that was sitting kind of defending his position, and then he was asked to give a description of what samsara is. Now, interestingly, in Buddhist philosophy, we have very precise definitions of so many different things, and you have to commit those definitions to mind, and you've been tested again and again, being able to hold your positions and make sure that the definition holds. But also, there's some things that don't have precise definitions, and one of them is samsara. And so we know what samsara is in the sense that we discuss samsara, we describe it. But then, if you open a Buddhist text and you look for a definition of samsara that everyone knows, there's nothing as such, or at least nothing that is common knowledge. Also, by the way, self-cherishing is the same. Now, we speak a lot about self-cherishing. We describe what self-cherishing is. There's no dictionary definition of self-cherishing. There's a description. We know what we're talking about, but you don't have like a hard, a very well-defined word-by-word dictionary definition for self-cherishing. Anyway, with samsara, let's not digress. Let's go back to samsara. And so Geshe said that there was one great scholar that was sitting for a debate, and he was asked to provide a definition for samsara. And he said, Geshe Tsultrim, the Geshe here, said that he became silent. He went into his head. Then kind of everyone went silent. And then he said, samsara is that state in which nothing works right for you. And he said that this is like a really beautiful way of describing what samsara is. Nothing works perfectly. Things might work for us well to a certain degree for some time, but not perfectly. There's always something that will not work at the end, that will spoil the plot at the end. And so karma is certain in that negative actions produce samsara. So even if it's not suffering as a painful sensation, it can still be a continued birth in a samsaric state. So karma is certain. That's the first feature of samsara. And then that's the first feature, general characteristics of karma. The second general characteristic is karma increases. And so I think that the common way of describing this general feature, karma increases, is saying that we perform action in this life, and so long as this action is not purified, so long as the action remains upon a mental continuum, it grows and increases. And so often we use that as a driving force for engaging in practices of purification. So if we believe that if we don't purify our actions quickly, and even more quickly, if we leave our actions as they are, they will grow and increase. And so the results that we will get from them in the future would be way, way stronger. I mean, the question is, how do we relate? The question in my mind is, how do we relate to this point of karma increases? How do we take it? Do we take it literally? Does it work for us to take it literally? If it does, then it's okay. But you can still, I think, if you wonder about this point, you can think about it, I think, from different perspectives. One of the perspectives that I sometimes use in order to think about it is when we think of a category of results, we have actions and then we have the results. One of the results that is presented is results that is similar to the cause that we have created, causally concordant effect. There are two types of causally concordant effect. One is in terms of experience, like, for example, I kill someone or I harm someone physically. The causally concordant effect that I experience in terms of my experience is said to be in the text experiencing a shorter life, being killed by others, being harmed by others. So when that happens to us, we can think, oh, I've created those actions, similar to actions in the past, now I experience the result of them. So that's one causally concurrent effect. The second one, which is said to be the worst effect of all karma, is in terms of our behavior, the habits that we develop. And so if I tend to engage in actions of harming others, speaking negatively to others, I do it through the force of habits. I do it again and again. And so I create actions like that again and again in the future. You know, the situation proliferates. And so when I think of how karma increases, I connected with the second feature of karma. Karma increases. One way for me to think about it is in terms of causally concordant effect in terms of my behavior. If I do not be, if I'm not careful, I create those actions again and again in the future, they will definitely increase and bring more results. It reminds me that I had, many years ago, I had an Irish partner, and there was some time that I spent in Ireland with her, and we also spent a couple of years together in India, and I got so used to using the F word. It's like every second sentence using the F word in Ireland, anywhere that we went. This habit grew so strong, strong that even now, I think 20 years after, I'm still trying to recover. So that, we create those habits. We behave negatively again and again and again. So karma increases. That's one way of thinking about it. Now, the third characteristics of karma, let's look at the third and fourth. You do not experience the results of actions you did not do, and actions done do not go to waste. And so those two features are really important for us in our day-to-day attitude with respect to our experiences, because often we think, as Buddhist practitioners, we think, well, I've been practicing Buddhism for 5 years, for 10 years, for 2 years, for 20 years. I've really tried my best. I'm trying as much as I can to develop positive actions. Why do I deserve it? When we experience problems, we think, I do not deserve it because I was practicing as much as I can positive actions. I've done practices of purification. I do not deserve it. Karma is dishonest. It doesn't really work. And so here, the general characteristics of karma, the third one says, you do not experience the results of actions you did not do. And so we might have tried really hard. We are trying really hard in this life to practice the Dhamma, and that's wonderful. As we're creating positive actions, we're also purifying negative actions. We're creating positive actions that will definitely bear positive results in the future if, by the way, whatever we do is not destroyed by anger, wrong views, or what have you. But also, we have behaved in a negative way in previous lifetimes. And from Buddhist perspective, we find ourselves again and again in samsara, in some without beginning and up until now. So we've already been through countless rebirths. And so certainly we've done quite a lot of bad stuff. That's the professional term, bad stuff. We've done a lot of it. And so when we experience something negative in this life, even if we have tried hard, it is likely to be a result of negative actions that we've done before. So, and had we not done them, we would not have met the results of those actions. And so it says here in the third feature, you do not experience the results of actions you did not do, and actions done do not go to waste. And so another situation that we can examine is a situation in which someone seems to be doing quite badly. They perform a lot of negative actions, but they've experienced success. I mean, particularly at this point in time, when we think of powerful people around the world, people that have the power they're wielding power, a lot of negative power in terms of, political sphere, environmental sphere, business, climate change or what have you, having the ability to create a lot of damage for themselves and for others. And you find that many of them are still successful. They wield a lot of power. And so when we think about it in terms of it doesn't have to be someone that is like massively, that has massive power, but you still find, for example, people around you sometimes that are behaving in a negative way, and they not only get away with that, but also they experience still good conditions. It might be that you're trying your best to be kind-hearted, to behave positively. You don't find success in your life in some areas of your life. Someone that you conceive of being a negative person in general, being cruel, harsh, rude, and so forth, finds success in their life. And so, first of all, when we think of success or the lack thereof, it can also be a result of actions that we have done in the past. So in this life, we might behave negatively. It does not mean that we cannot experience the result of positive actions done in previous lifetime. We see someone else behaving in a negative way, and they still find success in some areas of their life. They meet the results of actions they have done before, previous lifetimes. But even maybe in this lifetime, even if we try to, even if we do not know what positive actions they have done before, positive actions do not go to waste, but also negative actions do not go to waste. And so we do a negative action in this life, even if it is slight, if it is not purified by either a practice of purification using the 4 powers of the antidote, we will speak about it in later on, or if it is not purified using a meditation on emptiness, a realization of emptiness. If it is not purified in emptiness, actions do not go to waste. They will be experienced even 1,000 lifetimes in the future. These are the 4 general features of karma. Again, as I said in the beginning, karma is somewhere between slightly hidden and very hidden. I think that a lot about karma is very hidden to us. Much of the attitude that we develop towards this description of the 4 characteristics of karma, and also other things that we will discuss in karma, has to do with developing faith in the working of karma. But let's not limit ourselves to blind faith. We want to study other teachings of the Buddha. We are studying other teachings of the Buddha that are affecting our life and that can be verified through our experience. So we want to keep our mind open to the consideration of karma, and also not just to consider that, but also to let that affect our behavior. And also, I think that when I think of my approach to topics such as karma, I think that even if I do not trust the working of karma 100%, hands down, it is definitely correct, I think that it is likely to be correct. And therefore, if I can choose between acting in a positive way, acting in a negative way, if I can choose between purifying my negative actions or living things as they are, I would go with it. I would fall on the safe side. Of course, I have trust in the working of karma, but I still think that even if you have some doubts, it's good to still do things positively as much as we can, rather than giving way to behaving in a negative way and thinking that doesn't really matter. So, any questions before we move on to a more specific consideration of karma? Right.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
You mentioned purifying karma through understanding emptiness or experiencing emptiness. Is that a particular technique? I mean, I know that the goal is to understand and experience emptiness, but in relation to purifying karma, is that a technique like a Vajrasattva technique, or is that simply understanding emptiness or experiencing emptiness?
I think that both. Now, when we do practices such as Vajrasattva, 35 Buddhas, or other practices for purification of karma, we're supposed to be doing them through a certain reflection on emptiness. I mean, ideally, we would do them with a consideration of emptiness. And so you find that in many of those texts or practices, it begins with everything dissolves into emptiness, and from the state of emptiness arises such and such. From an empty state arises Vajrasattva, sitting on a lotus seed, a white moon disk, and so on and so forth. And so the first meditation that the first part of our meditation on Vajrasattva, for example, should begin with a consideration of emptiness. And so that's one point, but also just kind of thinking of a daily meditation on emptiness, or at least consideration of emptiness. We study about emptiness, we think about emptiness, we meditate on emptiness. Whatever negative action we do, our negative actions, first and foremost, are motivated by ignorance of trusting in objective existence. Whatever we perceive through our senses, whatever arises in our mental consciousness, it arises with appearances of things existing in and of themselves. Now, when I'm talking to you, when you're talking to me, when we're looking at everything around us, everything appears as if it exists objectively from its own side. Not only things appearing this way, we completely buy into it. We believe in objective existence, in independent existence. And so then, because of that, other afflictive states of mind arise. Anger, attachment, and so forth. And so, first of all, ignorance operates. Then we pay an incorrect mental attention to things around us. So, if something has 50% good qualities, we make them 100% good qualities. If something has 50% of negative qualities, we make it 100% negative qualities. So there's that incorrect mental attention that kicks in on the basis of trusting in things existing objectively. And then when we exaggerate good qualities, we become attached. When we exaggerate negative qualities, anger arises. Hostility, aversion, and so forth, they arise because of an exaggeration of negative qualities. And so all this, and then we act, of course, based on that. And so any consideration of emptiness contributes to a purification of our karma, because first of all, it undermines the root of our karma, ignorance. If we directly harm ignorance, it reduces the power of our negative actions. And so, because the basis for negative karma is ignorance. So that's one thing. But also, when we think of purification, a holistic approach to purification, let's say. So we say that we purify our actions using the application of the 4 powers of the antidote. And so we generate regret for actions that we've done before. We then think that henceforth, I shall not do it ever again. We also rely upon the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and also on bodhicitta in laying down our negative actions. And then we are doing something to counteract the force of our negative actions. And so the things that we do to counteract the force of our negative actions, the best thing that we could do is to do things which are opposite to what we've done. Like, for example, if there's some negative action that we've done because we're so attached to our resources or to the resources of others, in order to remedy that attachment, it's good to practice generosity, to practice charity. It will directly undermine that attachment that we have to resources. If we have acted negatively in harming others, then it's good to meditate on either patience or loving kindness, because that will reduce the power of our anger. And so, thinking of the consideration of we include those practices within the power of thorough application of the antidote. And so our meditation on emptiness, ongoing meditation on emptiness, study of emptiness, consideration of emptiness, and so forth, the more we do it, the more our mind will be open to see that things do not exist in and of themselves. And so the power of our afflictive emotions will decrease, will grow smaller and smaller over time. The more we think of emptiness, the lesser our afflictions arise. And so that's a great power of purification, don't you think? No, that's a real purification. And so we can do that not only in our daily study, reflection, meditation, and emptiness, but also make sure that also when we take up a certain practice, purification practice or other practice, that will begin with the consideration of emptiness and dependent arising. So what do you reckon? Is
Thank
it
you.
Cameron?
Cameron, yeah.
All right, cool.
That it makes perfect sense, and it also establishes a type of approach to all your practices, rather than just Vajrasattva as the purification practice. That it's all moments of every day.
Yeah. There's one text, I think it was Panchen Losang Chögyam, if I'm not if I'm not mistaken. I think that it was him that says that for those whom emptiness makes sense, everything makes sense. For those who emptiness does not make sense, nothing makes sense. And so, of course, we can think about the meaning of this saying, but as I said, when you think about emptiness and how it is related to everything that we do, we can use emptiness and dependent arising in order to enrich and increase the power of all the other things that we do. All right. And so we looked at the general characteristics of karma. Karma is certain, karma increases, we do not experience the results of actions we did not do, and actions done do not go to waste. Now, let's look particularly at the presentation of virtuous and non-virtuous karma. And so, first of all, let's look at the meaning of virtue and non-virtue. And so virtue, this is a more strict definition of virtue that is found in Buddhist scripture. And so virtue is that which by type issues forth a positive result. Now, by the way, when you look at more strict Buddhist terminology, it says that virtue is that which issues forth a wide fruition. Now, here at Chenrezig Institute, most of the time, my main role is the translator for the Geshe. So in Tibetan language, Tibetan Buddhist language, white is regarded, is connected with virtue. Black is connected with non-virtue. I think that we live in a political climate that makes it really difficult, or for me, kind of really uneasy to translate white and black as positive and negative. Maybe I'm too sensitive about it, but always kind of, I prefer to say in terms of white fruition, positive fruition, black fruition, negative fruition. I think that maybe for us it works better. And so it says, virtue that which by type issues forth a positive result, a positive fruition. Now, the word fruition in Buddhist terminology can mean either, in general, a good state of rebirth. And so virtue, to begin with, are those actions that we take, virtues that can issue forth in the future, produce a good state of rebirth for us in the future. So in general, there are two types of rebirth. Miserable rebirth, one of the three miserable states of existence, and comfortable rebirth. Sometimes they're called happy rebirth, but again, I think that the term happy rebirth almost sounds as if kind of everything is hunky-dory and kind of you're happy, clappy kind of person in that happy rebirth. Happy rebirth means that it's a relatively more comfortable rebirth. More comfortable comparing with agony, miserable states of existence. And so virtues are those which by type issue forth a positive fruition, like a good rebirth. But not only that, we can also say they issue forth positive experiences. sensations of happiness, physical well-being, mental well-being. These are virtues. Now, it is said in the definition that by type, they issue forth positive result. And the word by type is added to the definition because we can create a positive action today. But if we do something positive today and then we act in a very negative way, the force of negativity can undermine the virtuous actions that will result. The virtuous actions that we do. Particularly, it is said that when you look at teachings that are more specific, when you, for example, study Shantideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva Way of Life, or Chandrakirti's Supplement to the Middle Way, there are sections related to the perfection of patience, and they explain the drawbacks of anger. And it is said in those texts that one moment of anger can destroy roots of virtues accumulated over 100 eons or 1,000 eons. Now, so that are those statements. And so we create virtue, but it can be undermined. It can be destroyed. So by type, it can issue forth a positive result, but we have a disclaimer. If we behave in a negative way, if we become enraged, then our roots of virtue are being undermined, are being destroyed. So that's virtue. Let's look at non-virtue. Non-virtue, that which by type issues forth a negative result. So again, negative result could be a miserable state of rebirth, but it can also be a result of suffering, physical suffering, mental pain, but also other things like, for example, looking for something, not being able to get it, coming across again and again with things that cause us displeasure, being separated again and again from things that cause us pleasure. Non-virtues are those which by type issue forth a negative result. And again, but the word by type here has a particular significance. And so I can behave in a negative way, and if I behave in a negative way, definitely there will be future suffering. But if I lay down my negative actions, if I purify them using the 4 parts of the antidote, using meditation on emptiness and so forth, if I purify them, they will not. And so by type, they can issue forth a negative result unless I do something about it. So we have virtues, non-virtues, and then we have those neutral actions. The word for neutral actions refer to things that were not indicated by scripture. And the idea is that there are things which were told to us by the Buddha. For us, he explained very precisely types of negative actions. That's such a sweet dog. So there are things which are very negative, things which are very positive. They were described by the Buddha, and there are things that were not indicated in scripture. We call them neutral, actions which are neutral. And so then the main determining factor is one's motivation. So the motivation is not the only factor. So that's the main factor, but not the only one. So understanding of what is positive and negative is important too. I mean, I put it in because for me, it's still, in some sense, it's an open question. We say in general, when we study with our teachers, I think that you've had it before with the teachers that teach you at Tupten Nobeling. We say in general that if a motivation is a positive motivation, it's a virtuous action. If a motivation is negative, it's a non-virtuous action. In generally, we agree with that. But then I think that what about, for example, people that have fanatic religious views? Now, if I, for example, today decide that killing everyone that is not Buddhist is a good thing, or if I think that, for example, forcing everyone to become Buddhist is going to be good for them, because I think that Buddhism will bring happiness to everyone in the future, and therefore everyone has to convert to Buddhism. Even if I have a certain positive motivation involved with that, does it mean that whatever I do is a positive thing? Or if you have a certain spiritual belief, like for example, if you sacrifice animals, you're going to please God, and it's an act of faith. Even if you have positive motivation, does it mean that it's necessarily positive action? I don't know. I don't think so. But I think that in general, for the sake of our discussion, within the framework of Buddhism, a positive intention, which means an intention to be of benefit to you and definitely a benefit to others, is the main factor determining a certain action to be a positive action, a virtuous action. It has a potential of resulting in happiness and well-being. If our intention, if our motivation is negative, it will likely to result in suffering. Does it sound fair enough? All right. And so what I wanted to do now is to start to look at the breakdown of the 10 non-virtues. And so when you look at the presentation of the Lamrim, Lama Tsongkhapa presents more specifically virtuous karma and non-virtuous karma under the section of the paths of action. And I think that I touched upon it briefly in a previous session. And so rather than speaking about the 10 non-virtuous actions and the 10 virtuous actions, Lama Tsongkhapa is looking at a path of action, a path of virtuous action and a path of non-virtuous action. And the idea is that there are many factors that play a role in the performance of our actions. The motivation, the affliction that motivated an action, the actual performance, the way that we culminated, that we finished the action, either positive or negative. And so Lama Tsongkhapa presents a very detailed analysis of the path of action in order for us then to think of how do we change the efficacy of our actions. If we tweak the motivation, if we tweak the affliction in the sense that we try to reduce the power of the affliction, if we immediately regret negative actions that we've done knowingly, we know that they're negative, but we had to do them, or we immediately recognize that whatever we've done was negative and we immediately regret it and try to apply a certain remedial counterforce, it will change the course of the path of action. And so he presents that in the presentation of the 10 paths of actions. And so Sarah is asking, how long is this teaching? I think that we have 20 minutes to go. And this is the second session. We have 4 more sessions together. And then you have a practice day. All right. And so, and by the way, Sarah, if you need to go, I think that the sessions are recorded. I think that they're on YouTube, so you can also catch up later on YouTube. No worries whatsoever.
It usually takes about 48 hours to get to YouTube.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so, although there are many ways that we perform actions, still the principal paths of actions that were taught by the Buddha were called the 10 paths of action, the 10 paths of virtuous actions, the 10 paths of non-virtuous actions. Many of the other non-virtuous actions that we do, you can say, come under the big umbrella of the 10 non-virtues. There are things which are, you can call them natural misdeeds. Natural misdeeds are negative actions which are, you can say, naturally wrong. It's not that you need to prohibit them using a certain code of conduct that the Buddha laid out. Anyone that does them, whether they're a monk or a nun, a layperson, woman, man, or woman, Buddhist or non-Buddhist, those actions are called natural misdeeds. In that killing, for example, it doesn't matter if you're Buddhist or non-Buddhist, killing is negative. Stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and so forth. Those actions are natural misdeeds. Everyone that does them does a negative action. But of course, if you do it as if you're a monk, if you're a nun, if you're a lay practitioner, depending upon your vows and your set of beliefs, some actions can become more detrimental, more powerful, but they're negative by nature, you can say. And so the 10 non-virtues are things which are negative by nature. And so what I did was I looked at 3 sources. So one of them is the Lamrim Chema. That's the main source. I looked at a commentary that was composed by Geshe Sopa, that lived in the US for many years. I also looked at Pabonka Rinpoche, Liberation in the Palms of Your Hand, and I tried to pull in different points from their presentation. Now, before I will send the file to this presentation to Michael, and maybe Michael can share it with others. Does it work like that? Or I can also, what's the best way to share it with you guys? Maybe you tell me.
If you send it to me, we can get it posted on the website with the course materials.
Perfect. And so I will share it with you, but I think that one thing to keep in mind is Lama Tsongkhapa, Pabonka Rinpoche, they were monastics. They taught the presentation of the 10 non-virtues to a community of, mainly to a community of monks. And of course, you can say also to a community of nuns, but mainly to, they were working as monks in a community of monastics. They were teaching the monks' mates. Of course, there are many things from that presentation that are valid to us, but I think that some of the things in the presentation we can find confronting. But I think that for me, the way that it works is to kind of think, wait a minute, Lama Tsongkhapa here was teaching a community of monks. This is the attitude that he took. In a different context, he might have taught it differently. Also, with certain points in the presentation of Karma, our contemporary teachers, first and foremost, is Holiness the Dalai Lama. The teachers, they're different, not as dry and strict as you find in the writings of Lama Tsongkhapa, but they put it in a way that is more liberal. And so, first of all, I'm giving you the heads up that I just took what Lama Tsongkhapa said, what Pabonka Rinpoche said, what Geshe Sopa said. It provides kind of a base, a foundational basis for our discussion, but also it's not that we have to take everything as a written rule without thinking of the whole setup that those teachings were given, if you know what I mean. I think that probably when we get to more specific points, like for example, sexual misconduct, this is always a whole, when you think of what Lama Tsongkhapa said and Pabonka Rinpoche said with respect to sexual misconduct and so forth, I keep in mind it was taught to monastics, and therefore there was a certain emphasis in these teachings. It was given to us. I mean, I'm a monk, so I shouldn't say given to us, given to you, given to the kind of society in general. I think that maybe the emphasis would have been slightly different. I don't think that those teachings are irrelevant, but I'm trying to maybe desensitize us. Anyway, without further ado, let's look at the first one, which is the path of killing. All right. And so in Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation, and thereby also the other sources that I looked at, the presentation consisted of a few factors. First of all, what is the basis of the action? What is the attitude involved with the action? The attitude is divided into what is the perception, whether we have a correct perception or mistaken perception, what the affliction was involved with the performance of the action, and what was the motivation. Then what is the actual performance, and how do we bring the action into completion? Now, to that, I also added to this chart the weight of the action in relation to the object or the basis, and also the different types of results that those actions issue forth. And again, as I said before, the idea is that we understand what the basis, perception, affliction, motivation, performance, and completions are, so that we can change some of our some of the factors in the performance of non-virtuous actions so that we can reduce the efficacy of those actions. Sometimes we cannot avoid them altogether. Like, for example, just give you a simple example. I think that I said in the previous session that my house now here at Chenrezig Institute is like ant city. It is infested by termites. I live in their house rather than they living in my house. I live in their house. And so we had to call, not in my house here at the center, but in many houses here in the center, and we had to call pest control. And so killing an ant, killing white ants or termites, negative action. We have to do it. We have to do it, but we also consider the cost of our actions. So we can tweak or we can change some of the things that are involved with the path of non-virtues. Like, for example, am I doing it motivated by affliction? And if so, can I reduce the power of my afflictions? What is my motivation in the performance of an action? Can I perform the action and bring it to completion rather than being happy that I just obliterated all the white ants? Can I feel sorry for that and also take up some practices of confession, purification, animal liberation to counteract the force of my negative actions and so forth? And so just understanding the different components of actions help us to either increase the power of our actions, positive actions, or decrease the power of our negative actions. Okay. Often, by the way, before we get to the fine details, often the most simplified version of that is when we speak of actions, there's the preparation to an action, mainly the motivation, the actual performance, and the culmination. These are the three parts of action succinctly. But we will look at a more detailed breakdown. Let's look at killing. And so the basis of killing is another sentient being. Not only another sentient being, often it is said that sentient being need to be alive. I mean, we don't kill corpses, we need to kill another living being. Now, when Lama Tsongkhapa presents the perception involved with the attitude, he said basically you can have a mistaken perception or unmistaken perception. Unmistaken could be perceiving a living being to be a living being. A mistaken one is perceiving a living being not to be a living being. The whole point between distinguishing between unmistaken and mistaken perception is to regard what would be a heavy action. So for a complete path of action to occur, the perception needs to be unmistaken. And so if we think, for example, if I think I need to kill the white ants in my room, the termites in my room, but they're already dead. If I have a wrong perception, I still think I need to kill them, but the perception of something is mistaken. The path of action that I take is negative, but since what I intended to kill is already dead, it is a lesser infraction, or lesser, I wouldn't call it infraction. It's a lesser negative actions, sorry. So the perception, first of all, needs to be unmistaken for the action to be heavier. Now, the affliction in killing is any of the three poisons, which means obviously we kill because of anger, hatred, hostility, and so forth. But we can also kill out of attachment. And we certainly can kill out of ignorance, thinking, for example, that killing other living beings, it's not a big deal. It's not a biggie. It's not a negative action. The only negative action would be if we kill other human beings. So ignorance is also an affliction that can be a motivating force for killing. But then still, the concluding motivation is of hatred. And so this is, I think, kind of an important or an interesting point that we can think of. Often when we discuss karma or actions in a general way, we try to pin down our motivation to be one thing. Did we kill out of anger or did we kill out of attachment? I mean, it's a really nice intellectual exercise, but I think that when I look at the negative actions that I do, I find that actually there's a multitude of motivations that are involved with that. It's really difficult to pin them down to only one negative thing. So we can kill because of attachment involved with hatred. But altogether, to bring the motivation force into completion, it needs to be with a certain intention to harm, with hatred or with anger, which is involved with the intention to harm. And so, for example, I can kill because of attachment. Like, for example, I can think that I definitely need to rob a bank. I have something that I need to do. I need money for that. I need to rob a bank. And if I need to kill the clerk or bypasser, doesn't matter because I need that money. So you can say that attachment is involved with that action, but really to bring it, if I kill people in the act of robbery, to bring that action into completion, there needs to be the intention to harm, anger being involved. And so that's the affliction. The motivation is the desire to kill either a specific person or persons, or a general desire to kill whoever one might meet. So it can be, the point is that when, for example, we go to war in general, I guess that the group here, we are not going to war, but when you go to war, you think that I'm going to kill the enemy. You don't put a name to each and every person that you're going to kill, but you're going to war in order to vanquish the enemy. So that's a general intention to kill, or you can be more specific. Then the actual performance, Lama Tsongkhapa says, doing it by means of weapon, poison, mantra, or whatever it is, either by oneself or sending others to do the killing, right? So sending others to do our bidding, even if we think, even if we, sometimes as Buddhist practitioners, we think that I don't want to do this negative action. I can't do it as Buddhist, so I'll let someone else do it for me. If we ask someone else to do a negative action on our behalf, it's the same for us. We accrue that action. And so I connect that with then the things that influence the weight of the action of killing, either in relation to the basis, or in relation to the object, but also in relation to the way that we perform the action. And so, for example, Lama Tsongkhapa and others point out different things, like, for example, killing a large animal versus a small animal. Now, often it's quite interesting in Tibetan, in Tibetan culture, eating meat, for example. Meat is a very common piece in a Tibetan diet. And so, in general, while killing an animal is considered to be negative, they say that it's better to eat the meat of a yak or a cow or a bull rather than to eating chicken or fish. There is less killing involved when you eat a big animal. On the same, but then at the same time, it is said that bigger animals are more powerful, and so killing a bigger animal can be more negative. So they go two ways in relation to big and small animals. It can be more negative or it can be more positive, dependent upon the purpose of your killing. And so killing a large animal, a human being, a fetus, one's parents, an aunt, an uncle, a guru, a close friend, a learner, which means someone that is training along the Buddhist path, a bodhisattva, an arhat, the soul who realizes all of this can be considered as making an action become stronger. Also, when knowing that a Buddha cannot be killed and drawing blood from them with a harmful intent, that is also considered to be negative. Now, one thing that I wanted to say here, since it says here a fetus, in other words, abortion. I wanted to relate to that particularly because, again, we live in a kind of very charged political climate. And so I think that when I think of abortion and the Buddhist presentation in relation to abortion, I think about it. I try to kind of think about it with a mind that is as extensive as I can, from different perspectives. So, first of all, although killing a human being, or that which is formed as a human being, which means a fetus, is considered to be a negative action in Buddhism, it doesn't come with a sense of condemnation as it comes in our current political sphere. And so when we think of our own actions, we want to avoid negative actions with respect to ourselves, because they're going to cause suffering to us and, of course, suffering to others. The act of abortion, I think that in many Buddhist countries and also in Tibetan Buddhist society, is more of a private act that individuals choose to do, or might choose to avoid, but it is not part of the legal system. And so in the Buddhist, in the Tibetan Buddhist system, abortion is not a discussion in the legal system as introducing it as an illegal action, giving us the power to choose over our actions. But also, I had Tibetan Buddhist friends that also have opted for abortion in the past, because the circumstance in life was such that they thought that they had to make that decision. But together with that, they also recognized that it wasn't the right thing to do for them as Buddhists, and therefore after that they're doing and still doing actions to counteract that decision that I had to make before. And so I have a good friend that I studied with in India. It was one of my Tibetan teachers, and he told me that he was living, it's a bit Tibetan friend, and he said that when he and his wife had a daughter, they were living in utter poverty in India, and then they weren't careful. She got pregnant again. He said that they had no way to support another child, living in utter poverty. So they went for abortion, but he was still regretful after many years after that. So every year, he was doing practices for purifying negative actions, but also animal liberation and so forth. And so I think that the idea is that we take responsibility for the actions that we do. Now, sometimes we have to perform some negative actions, but we don't whitewash them. We take responsibility for what we do, and we try our best to either avoid negative actions or to rectify some of the things that we have done. Now, also, I think that abortion in general in our current climate is part of, I guess, patriarchal agenda to control women, right? So I think that in general, I think that the topic of abortion is not used in a Tibetan context as a way of trying to control women. Of course, women issues are a very broad topic that we can introduce into our discussion of Buddhist ideas. But I think that when we think of, in general, when we think of killing a fetus as a negative action, it's a negative action just as killing another living being. It does not mean to say that we cannot bring other consideration into the path of action that we choose, but we also need to take personal responsibility for what we do, and definitely not use that as a way of accusing others or developing a sense of superiority over others. Like, look at them, they're undergoing abortion. They're not good Buddhists. I'm a good Buddhist. I will never do that. No, this is not an attitude that we want to adopt. It's probably involved with pride, sense of being aloof. Other than that, I think that when someone does, if people do find themselves in a situation where they have to make such decisions, then having empathy and compassion towards them, and also towards, of course, the fetus, but also if they ask us to help, if they ask us for our opinion or for support, try to give positive support, compassionate support, in the best way possible. Well, what do you think about it? Does it sound too general?
It sounds
Anyway,
loving.
yeah, sorry.
It sounds loving.
Yeah, I think that kind of we have to keep it real in our own practice rather than kind of being dogmatic about such issues. We want to open our heart. And to open a heart is to open a heart with wisdom and compassion. Not only compassion, but also wisdom.
Lorna, did you have a question? Get your hand up.
No, I was just gonna actually kind of say, being a woman and, knowing what that's like. I think the, compassion and kindness is definitely a factor in there, and also just taking responsibility, that, and wanting to rectify that.
Yeah. I thought that it's good. It's a good point to bring up, particularly at this point in time, because abortion definitely in the US is a hot topic. And when sometimes when we hear that also abortion is a negative action from a Buddhist perspective, it's like we try to bring it into sometimes our agenda, or whether we agree with that or do not agree with that. So I think that it's good to look at those questions from a broader perspective and also from different points of view. And as you said, kindness and compassion, definitely, that should be the basis for our discussion. All right. And so I think that time is up for today. What I want to do in our next session is to continue to go over the 10 path of actions. I will send the material to Michael. I think that Michael should, discuss Buddhism, the email address. So you'll have this material with you soon. And so to finish off for today, let's dedicate all the merit that we have accumulated together. So as I said, for us, it's Slava Duchin today. For you will be tomorrow. So I rejoice for what you will do tomorrow. You can rejoice in all of our activities today. And it's going to be a happy, positive party. And so we can dedicate our merit more specifically for the development of bodhicitta that is motivated by great compassion, wishing to be of benefit to all sentient beings. And if not, if we are incapable at the moment for being beneficial to everyone, at least let's try to be beneficial to those around us. Let's try to harm less those around us. And thereby we'll be able to develop bodhicitta to a greater extent. And so may the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen, arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chandrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain till samsara ends. And also for the fulfillment of all of his honest activities, and we can include within that also, of course, the activities of Lama Zopa Rinpoche and other lamas. Several of the snow-land teachings on transmigrated beings who makes extremely clear the path to this unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And so finally, for the spiritual director of the FPMT organization, Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but also you can include in your heart the teachers of Thupten Nobeling, Geshe Sherab, or all other teachers that you have been studying with, but also the people that work for the sake of Thupten Nobeling, Dundrupla, and other beings. So you uphold the Sibiru's moral way who serves in the manifold bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Majina's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Several of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you very much. Hey, Nitya.